So today is Monday, August 23rd, 6 p.m. The Waunakee Community School District Board of Education, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ad Hoc Committee. First thing we're going to do is call to order. We're going to do the roll call. Okay, when you hear your name, please say here. Michelle Bird, Dave Belcher, Mike Brandt,
I'm here.
Audrey Deppin, Sam Paulson here. Joe Lewis is here. Melanie Meister,
Here.
Monique Mobley,
Here.
Isabella Moore, Laura Ostrander,
Here.
Regina Fable,
Here.
Leslie Petty, Mike Pisani, Bethany Pottinger,
Here.
Tim Shell,
Here.
Christina Scheppelman,
Here.
Diana Tress Russ,
Here.
and Nia Bang. Is there anybody I did not call? All right, so we're going to do the approval of the minutes. Could I have a motion?
So moved.
Anyone want to second it? Second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all opposed? Okay, so the agenda, we'll pull it up for me. Oh, okay. It's just- So approval of the agenda. Could I have a motion?
So moved. Gina.
Second.
Second. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, any public comments?
There were no public comments.
Okay, so there's no public comments. So the first thing that we're going to do is discussion and possible action on interim recommendations to the Waunakee School Board of Education regarding issues of immediate concern. So A is review and discuss written draft of recommendations to the Waunakee School Board of Education. Let's start with that.
So, Diane and I took a stab at taking ideas from the survey and looking at those top 10 priority areas and organizing them in a way to put the highest criteria areas first, and then put in sort of recommendations or steps that people might look at in terms of addressing those areas. We just kind of incorporated what we had in front of us based on the survey taken and the information after that. Tim, if you want to speak to any of the pieces that you think you might want to look at more specifically, because in looking over it, you said there might be some pieces we need to look at. Maybe you're better at sort of directing us through those. People did provide feedback for us. Thanks to those of you that did that. That was very helpful in providing editing and things like that. But as far as the process, I'm open for feedback of how we proceed.
I think you did a very nice job pulling all the information together, organizing it thematically, and with the recommendations. I just noticed two things that I felt we might want to tweak a little bit, and they're very small things. They really aren't the main thrust. So on under conditions at schools, part 2, engage students in their work and develop and or improve communications to inform students of actions that support their experiences. This includes making concerted effort to fill vacancies in student organizations and promote inclusion, for example, the Black Student Union, VSU, etc. When I thought about vacancies, is there, and Christy, you're one of our affinity group advisors.
So is Monique.
And Monique is as well. So, I mean, when I looked at that, I was wondering, because our vacancies are currently filled, we always do that, but perhaps it could be more focused on professional learning specifically for advisors, because we really haven't provided any of that. And I'm wondering if that might be more in the spirit of this. That was just one thought.
And one thing I will say is I think that we were drawing pretty directly from ideas that people gave us. And so it's hard to trace back exactly if somebody thought there was a vacancy. My thinking was that just was to ensure that those organizations can always continue in the event, because there's always a requirement that there's a staff person who is supervising the organization. So I wonder if that was sort of the tenet, though I have to say, I mean, your suggestion is more comprehensive.
And I guess, you know, I'd be kind of interested, we've got two people who served in that role. You know, we want these groups to be high quality experiences for kids. We have people who are willing to take on the adult leadership roles. How can we be of good support, I guess, and what language would reflect that?
I think that's really Monique. I'll go and then Monique can. I don't want to take too much time, but I think, Tim, I think you have a really interesting point. One of the things that I can tell you, because I've started 2 clubs in this district, and right away, when we started Sonia Doris, it was very, it didn't really become a formal club until quite some time after really people realized it was happening. And partly that was just for a variety of reasons, one of which just being safety for students and gathering, not feeling super comfortable. So I think there is something to be said for supporting advisors and doing it the best way possible. And also I was involved in starting the GSA at the middle school, and kind of that delicate balance of supporting kids and the staff. So I actually think that's a really cool idea, but some of it also is supporting the students of what clubs they want. I think sometimes we have our standard clubs, you know, that happen, and I don't know, I know there's been different ones that have started in the middle school and it's kind of interest, but yeah, you have to have those people that are pretty dedicated and volunteer their time. There are those staff that do it, but I'm just trying to think like how would we feel better supported? I think this, or 2 years ago, we actually fought to get a stipend. So that was really helpful. That like recognized all the work that we do. So I think that maybe just making sure that we recognize our club leaders and get them professionally. So it could be something simple like that, which I guess we have to an extent. It's an interesting process to get this. I don't know if we even want to go off on this tangent.
Well, I mean, so we have a standard process for all of our co-curriculars,
Yes.
which is, I think they exist for 3 years with unpaid advising, and then they, for lack of a, then they transition to paid advisorships in the 4th year. And I think that's actually handbook language, although I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yes, I believe it is.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think, you know, and I think this point, you know, I'm bringing it up in the context of the affinity groups. This is, I think, really true for all of our clubs and organizations. Is there more we could do to, you know, support staff who, you know, and we also have community volunteers who do this, who want to invest their time into this. And you're right, this could be a big conversation.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't need to.
I guess my question, is it the verbiage of vacancy?
Yeah,
or
that
what?
was wondering.
Well, vacancy, I mean, so obviously we want vacancies filled, but when I think about all of our clubs and organizations, and I think about these in particular, because this is more the wheelhouse of this report, you know, I think about, well, we've got vacancies, but how do we, you know, similar to how, you know, thinking about how do we support having high quality staff for, you know, the main positions, how do we, you know, recruit, support, and retain high-quality individuals for advisorships. This is true not only for affinity groups, this could be true for anime club, this could be true for, you know, French club, any of these things.
Is that maybe what we say in here, what you just said?
I just thought that was perfect.
Because- Right, how do we recruit? So this includes making a concerted effort to recruit. Tell me it's something and retain.
Recruit, support, and retain.
And retain what?
Highly qualified.
Well qualified. Oh, I hate. Then that could get into a discussion of, do we have pre-existing qualifications? But I mean,
And then maybe we.
maybe
create them.
just say recruit,
It is-
support, and retain educators and community members as club and organization advisors or something like that.
It's posted, the position is posted on weekend, which I thought was unusual. I did not know that club and advisor positions are posted on weekend.
Okay. Make sure I got that right.
They're looking, that's where
It's been filled for like a month or so.
Well,
now,
then
so
There may be many positions that are filled or unfilled that are still posted.
Still on
so that
weekend?
may be-
Okay, I'll take that back.
I didn't know that that would be a place to look to be an
Yeah.
advisor.
So this is how I restated that, if anybody wants to make sure I did it in justice. Okay,
So could you just explain, I guess, the process when you do have a club and someone wants to do it, just say obviously it's staff or it's a community member, like what is that process?
So
thank you.
I can tell you what the process is for the stipended positions I'm responsible for, which are not these, but you want to make sure they are made available to all interested parties. So it's not just a case of me going to Sam and saying, hey, Sam, I've got a vacancy, I'd like you to fill it. We want people to have an opportunity to apply. So usually we have some kind of recruitment process that's open. I really couldn't tell you how much we've used weekend or not historically for these.
So that's not like a traditional thing that you
I really couldn't say, Joel. I mean,
I've never seen it, but I don't.
So then it's basically somebody saying, I want to do this.
Yeah, it's a.
we would usually put in an out, so there's two things. If you've got an existing vacancy, you would usually put something out. Distribution list, I think, would put sheets in different venues and also your advisorships that are open. But we also have ways to start new clubs. So for example, Los Sonadores, that was an idea that somebody brought and it came together. And that's why they don't have a stipend for their first 3 years is the goal. We want to see what clubs kind of get traction with the kids.
It
And
does
so,
seem to me silly that we would ask someone to donate that time for 3 years. If they're running a club, whether the students, it becomes terribly popular or not, is not indicative of the time that staff spend facilitating and developing it from the ground. So again, this is handbook language, so this isn't the place where the decision gets made, but we can make, I think, a recommendation. We're specifically talking about affinity groups, I think, so far, but perhaps it carries over to all. That if we know that something provides something for kids that makes them feel welcome and safe, to ask someone to volunteer 3 years of time before it's proven to be a club seems inappropriate to me. Because that means that the people who started the BSU were never compensated, and now they've left and they never were compensated for any of that time. And that feels, again, inappropriate to me.
Would that also prevent clubs from getting started as well? Like, that's.
I think you have to have someone willing to donate 3 years worth of time
Yeah.
in order to start a new club. I understand kind of where it's coming from, but if a group automatically has members and is meeting regularly, they've proven themselves in my mind.
Mike would like to speak.
All right, go ahead, Mike. Mike?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would opine on that, I really agree with what I think Gina is saying there. And the only real reason that 3-year requirement is in there is that that's board policy, and board policy can be set aside by the board deciding to set aside board policy at any time too. And I recall some votes we've had on the issue of, well, it's been the 3 years, are we going to approve this now? And then we do, and it's still a question of when you approve it. So there's really nothing stopping the board from approving something faster, but the board. So if it's an important enough situation, such as we discover we don't have this and it's something that the students desperately need, it's arbitrary to say it needs 3 years. If the policy said 5, it would be 5. So it can always be changed so long as it is the board's actually asked to do something. So I just put that out there, that the 3 is not mandatory by any law beyond board policy. And we all know some board policies aren't followed anyway. So that's it.
Mike, I just have a question. So after 3 years, that person automatically gets it, or it has to be?
You just dropped.
It
Maybe-
has to be approved.
So it's not even like a guarantee that you're
No,
gonna
and
get
I don't
it.
really know what it means to be approved, I'll be honest. Like, I mean, we had to fill out a form and like talk about how many members and how long we've been doing it.
Because
So,
that can also be an obstacle too. What happened if someone just doesn't like you and doesn't?
So
like
what
you? Or the-
recommendation could we put in here to get past this barrier?
Yeah.
Is it a recommendation to revisit board policy? I mean, what is
My suggestion
Yeah.
would be, and this is again just, and I realize I'm coming in with an administrative perspective here, is to encourage the board to revisit the time horizon before advisors can receive compensation. My personal opinion is if we required compensation from the beginning, then because budget's involved and you have authorization, I mean, I think it might actually, if we insist on compensation all along, it might actually inhibit the generation process. But 3 years, to your point, we had 2 individuals, one in particular who played a key role in getting BSU off the ground. And they've moved on before they qualified for any compensation for that. So I think that's a really good observation.
I mean, and that's not the first time that's been the case. That was
No, it's
also
not.
the case for some others. So.
Yeah.
Is that, what about academic clubs and things like that? Is it the same process?
If they're new, yes. So like French Club
Yeah.
is a standing club. If
Yep.
French Club becomes vacant, somebody goes into it, it's an established club, it's paid. If we were to set up a nuclear physics club, which we currently don't have.
Yeah.
There are lots of science clubs, just, then that would go through the 3-year period.
Yeah, okay. I got some of your language, encourage the board to revisit the time horizon before, and then I kind of lost it.
Before advisors can be compensated.
That's no question. Mike, can I ask you a question? Mike? I must be scaring him away.
So are people, when we add that, does that seem like a reasonable add as I type that in? Okay.
Yeah, Mike, can you hear me? Mike? I just want to ask you a question. Okay, so. when
Yeah,
you
go ahead,
were on-
Joel.
Yeah, when you were on the board, and someone started a club and it was 3 years, was there anyone who ever got denied? Or what is the process of somebody getting that compensation or that stipend?
I don't recall anyone actually being denied at any point. because I don't recall anyone ever making a request for anything faster than having been a club for over 3 years. I only recall there really being one situation in which there was any kind of question at all, and I don't recall well enough to know who exactly it was to put any name onto it, but this is one of those things where it's a rule, but most clubs have been in existence for so long that they're treated as a given that they're always there. So there really never was a question of denying anything. It'd probably be a better question for Dave, because he's been on the board longer, but I just don't remember if there was ever anything that's been denied at all. At least I don't think there was in the 3 years I was on.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Well, and honestly, 3 years is sort of an arbitrary number. I mean, I think we gotta move on
Yeah.
and just revisit this, but it is interesting, like I think about why 3 years. I can tell you right now, by year 2, we knew it was a go.
Yeah.
Honestly, by year 1, I almost feel like that would be more appropriate. I understand though, kids like come to teachers and be like, hey, let's do this club, and then it phases out. I get that.
But you don't need 3 years for it.
I don't believe so.
Well, and if there are no participating students in a year, you don't get paid to be the advisor of a club with no students.
Right.
So should it fizzle out, no one's gonna get paid for not working. That's not a thing.
I have one follow-up question, because the training piece that Tim originally brought up got a little bit lost. If the advisor is a school staff person, then I think some of the training and professional development discussion we have elsewhere in the document would probably serve those individuals, but I'm wondering if a community member is volunteering, is there some type, for lack of a better word, I want to say safe sport, some sort of bias, safe advising professional development that a community member has to go through to allow them to advise youth?
Some for athletics, just because of the nature of athletics, but not for clubs or scope. I mean, there's screening, there's background checks, there's all of that.
Right, right.
But in terms of any professional learning, no. And I would say many of the things you might do in professional learning could translate to advisorships, but we don't offer, at least we haven't, in my memory, offered any workshops for staff specifically on being an advisor or in that capacity.
So I'll just let you guys know that. So recently, I'm actually going through the screening for BSU as a community advisor to be part of it. So I have to go with background check, all that stuff. So to answer that question.
Well, and then as I was talking, I was thinking there is somewhere in the document, I think, where we emphasize, and there was discussion that the kinds of professional development opportunities that are open to people should be beyond just the teaching staff. It was, I think, inclusive of probably
There are
all
educators,
aspects.
office
Yeah,
staff.
thank you. So maybe that would capture that possibility too. I just wanted to bring it up. Just
Yeah.
thinking, I was not sure how common it was that there'd be non-school staff. Thanks.
I should just clarify before I said that I believe that it was in the teacher handbook, and I cannot find it.
So it must be strictly a
So it
policy.
must be a board policy, so to make reference to that. So maybe as we get down to the PD bullet points or whatever, we want to just make sure that somewhere that item lives in there.
And my other point, which I think will be a lot quicker than this last one, and I don't mean to disrupt our momentum, is over in the section on, in fact, there are only 2, shows what a great job Diane and Laura did. Schools maintain accountability by using multiple indicators, that section.
Yep.
Under 3, offer scholarships to students for extraneous fees such as those associated with advanced placement classes and exams. It says those required to retake. The one thing I want to say is that if you qualify for the fee waiver, you don't pay for your AP tests. So that's already in place.
Right.
College Board gives schools nationally a 50% reduction in fees for any student that's low income. And in our district, we pick up the remaining 50%. But ACT retakes, we don't. So I mean, I'd just say take the AP aspect out.
Diane, you want to address that
And
one?
do students know that in advance? Is that clearly communicated with everyone?
So they
What do you
used to have to
They
know
would
and
have to
ask for the
know.
fee waiver, but about 5 years ago, we moved to a system where if you signed up for AP, we would pre-register you for the tests. You had to opt out of taking the tests, and when we did that, we would review our existing fee waiver form and any student that, because when you apply for free and reduced lunch at the start of the year, you have that, and you can check in for different information sharings, including fee waivers. It's automatically waived at the beginning. We did that as remove the barrier of information.
So for that 3, then offer scholarships to students. So we can remove those associated with advanced placement classes. Do we want to keep in though the ACT, the retake ACT? It is.
The first paragraph under schools maintain accountability.
Right.
Well,
Just about
Right
the
in
chart
here.
at the bottom.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good use of the student assistant fund. I mean, I think if you know, so the state several years ago moved to providing all juniors with the opportunity to take the ACT, and I think that's great. There was a great move by the state, but that occurs in the late winter of your junior year. And realistically, most of our college, certainly 4-year intending students, take an additional ACT at some point, either in the spring of their junior year or the fall of their senior year. And the ACT is not only for 4-year college attending students. Madison College also uses, because it's now a universal 11th grade test in Wisconsin, they use it as one of the assessments for their placement criteria, where you show that you don't need to take developmental non-credit bearing courses at Madison College. So the opportunity versus, say, an ACT you took in late February of your junior year to be able to come back and say, in the fall of your senior year, take it a second time with more instruction and time and potentially raise your score, I think that's could be a real advantage to kids. And so if you come from a low income situation, you might not feel you're in a position to take advantage of that second test event.
so low income is determined on the national.
If for us, it's based on, are you eligible to reduce lunch?
So should we name that in here somewhere? Because if you say something to the extent of offer scholarships to students, are we naming that as those that receive free and reduced lunch, or are we leaving it open-ended?
I would say we could use the term fee waiver, and
Okay.
then it's not free reduced lunch specifically, but that's what it tracks.
Perfect. Got it.
That'd be my personal suggestion.
Perfect. Nope, that's great. You have the language. I don't have that language.
And would we want to clarify that it's from the student assistance fund or recommend that it be so that it's not shut down as a extra expenditure from the district?
I think that makes sense. I mean, that fund was intended when it was developed to support kids in a variety of situations. And
But just to clarify for
Yeah.
potentially new board members who may not know what that is about, they could ask a specific question.
Say that fund name again.
The student assistant fund. Okay, thank you.
And then just the language, offer fee waivers to students for extraneous fees. So students are who qualify for free and reduced lunch are on the fee waiver already. So I'm just trying to figure out how we could say their ACT fees are, I mean, how do we say that?
Continue to?
Say that
Is it a continuing thing?
But that wouldn't, there's a twist though, because if a student's going to retake the ACT exam, they have to register and have a source of payment. So it wouldn't be like the fee was just automatically waived. It would
Correct.
be that there
They'd
have
have
to be some sort of transfer of funds to pay
Yes.
that.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think it's the kind of thing that, if a student came in and sat down, potentially with their school counselor or somebody we designated, it could happen. I mean,
Yes.
the reality of our situation is the number of students in our high school that qualify for fee waivers is not that large. I mean, it's probably feasible to facilitate that internally, but you're right, because typically that happens at home. You sit down at your computer and you take care of it, and yeah, there need to be some kind of mechanism.
So did we address that we replace waiver with,
No, I think it's okay. It's just the fee, there's like the verb fee waivers and
Right.
there's like when you're on a fee waiver. I think we should just leave it. 'Cause it makes sense, but what I'm trying to say is not any kid can get a fee waiver. You have to be through the process of free and reduced lunch and we put on a fee waiver, but I think it's too hard to explain that. It's clear you will not qualify. You have to go through student financial assistance.
okay,
Makes sense.
The other thing I wanted to add in the beginning.
Yep.
Let's scroll over. It's just the number of meetings that we had.
yes,
So we had 19.
is it 19?
Yeah, and then the amount of people that we have is 18.
So 18.
Currently,
I was gonna say,
So, I mean, it was that before, and that's also another conversation, but yes.
and then, I'm sorry, tell me one more time the number. of
So 19 meetings.
Thank you. Could we say between 18 and 23? I mean, there were a lot of people involved, and I think that's one of our strengths. Well, and with the ending point, you could say 23 people over time, like,
right.
because in that span of time, 23 people were involved, whether they were involved at the last moment or not. We're not saying 23 people participated in the end assessment.
Oh, so you just want total.
It's just kind of like, who's been involved in this
Served on the
process of informing the ad hoc
Yeah, then it
audit?
was obviously more people than that.
Is that fair?
Yeah, so
I mean,
how about
maybe we
something,
need
how
to-
about something like this?
Yeah.
18 individuals comprised, yada, 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 throughout the process, plus another 5 individuals who participated in the beginning and for a variety of individual reasons needed to discontinue.
I mean, I don't know if we necessarily have to tell them that, but
Okay.
do you think we need to tell them that?
I'm not sure.
I
Yeah.
just say 23. Because
Okay.
really,
Just
there's
so-
been 23
okay.
people involved, right?
I mean, the
Because there was
sentence is simply,
that many.
the committee included this many individuals, and it
Actually,
should.
I thought it was 25. But like, it wasn't 25.
You know what, I don't have.
Actually, Mike, are you there?
Okay, between 20 and 3.
How about we just
Thank you.
let Rebecca later on look at our original roster, whatever that number is.
Yeah, I'm here, Joel.
Yeah, how many people were on the committee at the beginning?
I honestly couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I think it was 24 or 25.
Okay,
I don't remember. The last number in my head is the wrong number because it's in the nasty email I got saying that you're all just yes men for me. So I don't remember what exactly it was, but we can always look back and find it because it's in the initial amount that was put up on the district website.
all right, thanks, Mike.
That's true. There
That
were
was on the website.
23 people at our first meeting.
I think there's that list of contacts. All right. Anything else that spots in it for content that needed attention?
Really just a grammatical thing I just caught where my cursor was a second ago. Reviewing data related to the criterion. Shouldn't be that to each criterion or the criteria?
Yeah, to the criteria.
I'll just grab it quick.
Sounds good.
I mean, that's all grammatical stuff, but I think you guys are gonna go to that,
Yeah.
right?
Monique very kindly helped us go through it. There's a couple of people that went through and they're like, edit.
No.
So, very, very
I always
helpful.
like to catch those things when I see them because.
Yeah, and
like,
Mel
I
too.
just
Do that
read it
when-
over.
Where Tim was
Yeah.
before, it was like two, was it colons?
Yeah. I mean, if anybody wants to volunteer just to comb through it one time, and we don't have to do it during this meeting. If you like editing and you want to go through it, you feel free to do that.
And from a readability standpoint, I know somebody suggested bullets
Yeah.
instead of numbers or formatting it. And just, Tim, from your experience, do you think it would be more readable and more easier to consume if we don't have to do it now, but later we listed it in bullets or numbers rather than have everything lumped together in a paragraph?
So I think it's fine. I think the person who's got the most background to answer this though would be Mike, because I guess what I would say is, I think this document is in really good shape as it stands, but if you looked at board book for a board meeting, depending on the meeting, the board can have a lot of material in there to review. So
Sure.
I'd really value Mike's perspective on it. I mean, my suggestion would be that when this comes into the board, that there be a slide deck summarizing this as well. Now, that does bring us into death by PowerPoint territory, where people glom onto the slide deck and maybe don't look at this, but I do think to make some things more highly visible, you could address that in the slide deck. But Mike, as a board member, former board member who would have to work through board book, how do you feel about the formatting here?
I think it looks really good. I mean, I emailed Joel and Rebecca about this, that I deliberately did not participate and put any comments in on this document for, I think, reasons that should be obvious at this point. But I do think putting something that's readily digestible into like a 1 or 2 page PDF is probably useful, depending on the meeting where board members are looking at it, because they're hopefully reviewing a lot of documents, and something quick like that is pretty easy to go through. Bullet points are useful, but then also have something for a deeper dive, because some board members will really like to get into that, others will not. So it's good to have a couple things like that there. And then when this does go before some committee, either goals or policy, or the full board, it would be useful to have 1 or 2 or more people there to basically answer any questions about it too, because otherwise the board will kind of just take on a life of its own and start talking, and may lose the thread of what we do want them to discuss or get at if there isn't someone there to answer questions. I mean, Tim, you've said on the hot seat probably 100 times, how much would the board know to discuss about a curriculum meeting if you weren't there to tell them really what they were talking about? So I think it would be useful to have something. I like how this looks. It's better than probably what I would write, and I appreciate putting it together, but bullet points in some short document that can be digested quickly would be good too.
Thank you. That's easily done, I think.
Mhm.
I would like to address in the first paragraph, just because I've heard some dialogue during recent board meetings about the audit tool itself. And there was a subcommittee that met and reviewed many other options and narrowed it down to this one, and I'd like that to be reflected, just to show accurately what the process was
Is
like.
that not in there?
Well, it says that we researched and selected the NEA opportunity audit.
How would you like that to be? Because I agree with you, that's something that we considered, and I would love your wording about how you would like that to read from the perspective of that subcommittee.
Could it just be we researched we researched a number of tools
Yeah,
and selected that? Would that be your point?
yeah, and I think we could address it in the presentation as well. I think that's a succinct, very valid way to have that. Thank you.
And I do think the breadth of the tool, because I mean, there are some equity audit tools we looked at that were more narrowly focused, but I do think an advantage of this, although it took us several meetings to do it, was
It's an understatement.
but I do think that it really led to a richer and deeper conversation that touched on a lot of different aspects of the school program. And so I know it was a big task for us, and I know there has been some conversation about the tool, but I do think the conversation and the exploration process here has been pretty comprehensive.
Does that possibly take us to next steps then of creating further work, or is there anything else on this document that we'd like to look at?
I think we're good. Not hearing
Awesome.
And I would note that we are going to remove the priority table at the bottom of the document. We just left it there so people had some reference.
All right, so next is a recommendation on the creation of an enhancement of a dedicated reporting system / policy for events of bias and bigotry. We spoke about this before at our last meeting. Tim and I provided an update, so there's no further update regarding that, right, Tim?
No, but before we move on a little further, Joel, I mean, coming back to this,
Okay,
I think Mike made a really good observation, which is, you know, the committee's gonna, because the September board meeting is just around the corner. And so Mike is 100% on point that for something that so much work has been put into, it's important that this actually be presented to the board. I mean, the document will be in board book, but I think thinking about, you know, who will actually present these findings, like a 2 to 4 person team, I think is important. And I just don't know if we're gonna have another opportunity to talk about that.
I mean, I thought, Gina, weren't you?
I
volunteer that?
volunteered, but I don't know who it might be working with me, so I
Right, that
appreciate
was-
that.
yeah.
Coming back to that,
Oh, okay. I didn't know. So to get a second person to,
or at least a second person. I mean, I mentioned last time that I think it's important that we include members of the committee that are not staff,
Mhm.
just to display the true nature of how this committee has worked. So I don't know if Rebecca, did you hear from anyone? I know in an email
I
you
heard
were,
from a couple that said they
No,
were
thank
not
you.
interested,
okay,
but I didn't hear of anyone who was interested. There were some people I haven't heard anything from, so.
I mean, Joel, as chair, were you thinking about?
I think there's other areas that I was gonna focus on in terms of that I was working on, and we can have that conversation too. Not necessarily the audit tool, which is other things about our committee in general that we were talking about, kind of like how we're moving forward and what we're trying to do. So that's where I was looking at it.
and I mean, frankly, I was hoping that it might be part of, like, how will it be noticed that it's just the audit tool? Or I would encourage us to have at that very same meeting, how to move forward conversation, because it,
So maybe, what maybe we can do is just do both,
Yeah, right.
right? So we
That's what I
can
was
do the
hoping.
audit part, and then we start talking about kind of like the stuff that's underneath the agenda too, towards, what Mike brought up. And maybe start talking about that as well, so kind of have that more comprehensive that way.
I think that would be great.
I don't mind doing that. All right, does anyone have any other ideas or?
I knew when that meeting is.
September 13th.
Is there like a time frame? Like how long we could talk?
It would start at, well, I would have to check into that for you. Tim's a good, field person on that one, but, because this would not be a public comment, this would actually be an agenda item. And so sometimes that depends. Mike would like to speak.
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. I think that, well, if we do anything like what administration has to do, we'd be sitting there for anywhere between 2 and 4 hours and hopefully wait for your turn to give a short presentation. But I would be hopeful that it would probably end up being somewhere around 8 o'clock at that meeting, when the board usually tends to get to committee reports. And, you know, what I would imagine is it'll be whoever is speaking basically there to answer questions about what exactly happened, what the committee's overall doing in addition to what's actually being put down in writing. I doubt it would take longer than 10, 15, 20 minutes, but then it tends to be how long the board wants to discuss any given issue and if there's any actual action item from there. But no, Tim has done this many times. So he'd be a good source in terms of what that ends up looking like too.
And I think I think the 8 o'clock is what I'd agree with that, Mike. And I do think that if, you know, the conversations had with Randy and Joan, they could try to structure the agenda in such a way that it will be touched on by 8 o'clock and not go later in the meeting. You know, as Mike said, there's going to be the actual presentation. You know, I think 10 to 15 minutes would be a good target for this group because the materials will have been in board books, so kind of main themes, and then the bigger questions about the role of the committee. And then it's going to be up to the board's questions. And I would not be surprised if there are questions and discussions around the table on this. So I could see the item actually maybe going out to 45 minutes, all inclusive, depending on, because this is a significant report. This committee's put in a lot of work. It's something the board is interested in. And so, you know, I would say it could go in the 30 to 45 minute range when discussions, that'd be my guess.
I would like to speak again.
Yeah, and I think it's also important for whomever is speaking at the meeting to just kind of be prepared to not necessarily have a conversation, but to be able to respond to comments that I somewhat expect the full board will get either through public comments or comments that they're being given by people who have the board members' ears, just in that there's a lot of misinformation out there about what precisely the committee's doing, how it was started. I mean, my text messages with Dave Betcher were subject to an open records request because people think there is something going on where there isn't. So you'll very likely get questions or comments about things like that when the way I would put it is that this audit's fairly anodyne and it's fairly straightforward and driven by what are we looking at, what we're doing, what can we do better, and nothing else than what most people seem to think it's about when they're upset about it. So there's a reason why I'm not suggesting that I go and talk this thing, because I don't want to provoke controversy in any way over something that's fairly straightforward that's meant to really help. So just keep in mind that you're not just talking about this audit, you're talking about everything. And you may have to basically comment or respond to things that are being said at the start of the meeting too, which I hope don't happen, but I fear could be somewhat provocative.
Hey, Mike, I just have a question for that. So the thing is that we're presenting something to the board. So, I mean, this is not a question and answer for the public, right?
Public can only comment during public comment.
Yeah, so there's
No
interaction with the public, but I think what Mike's alluding to is that the public's in regular contact with the board. So there may be, and I do think the board does endeavor, when they know there are strong themes in the community, to get those surfaced around the table to try to facilitate conversation around that. Is that kind of where you're thinking, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, it's not lost on me that there are very vocal people who would just have a difference of opinion, but then some people don't necessarily have a good faith argument against what we're doing either, and will try to muddy the waters in what we're doing. So there is some of that, which could, one, be in public comment, and two, could just be something that's being told to board members outside of everything too. So I'm just saying, be prepared for a discussion that's asking pointed questions about what we're doing and being able to give honest, open answers about all that. I mean, the main thing that I've seen so far is basically the accusation that the very foundation of the committee itself is illegitimate, which I will just honestly say is kind of absurd, given that the board unanimously approved it without any opposition whatsoever until, the last 4 months when the national media turned on to, the CRT issue. So that'll come up, but I don't think there's any there, but I'm anticipating it being an issue. And there's board members that have already effectively said the committee just shouldn't even exist. So be prepared is all I'm saying.
Offer a perspective. I think that this is a topic that's existing across Wisconsin and across the nation. And I want us to take pause in the fact that this is a response to change and a response to different perspectives. And I think that as a body, we are open to exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion because it is work we believe in. But that doesn't mean that people asking clarifying questions for transparency should make us worry. It should open the idea to a table so that we can grow together in understanding this process. So kind of just putting a pause on the emotion, putting the ideas on the table, and then having ongoing discussions is what's going to get us to that next place. And so instead of kind of sitting in both sides of fear. So I just kind of want to name that is kind of where my brain is existing, and people can add on or not.
And I totally agree with that. I just don't want to get into this debate or that we have to justify who we are as a community. To me, that's another conversation, right? So right now we're presenting something, and then of course it's going to be questions. That I'm okay with. It's just that I'm thinking about the conversation we got, what you're hearing from our community, some parts of the community, and what they're saying. Like that's really not the time and the place for those type of conversations. That's what I'm saying.
Totally. And then at what point, as we move into parents and community engagement, do we start providing opportunities to see when and how to have those conversations because they are valid and it's what is going to move a community forward together. But I totally hear you because it is not a question and answer. It is a here's what we've come to and move forward with wherever we are.
I do think that part of our responsibility when presenting to the board for the only time we ever have is to talk not only about the work that we've done and make the recommendations for the future, but to I would like to see one of the recommendations be that this committee continue to work together and that we continue to do some of the legwork that is required to bring any of these ideas to fruition. Because I completely reject the notion that our work here is done. And I think if we leave the meeting without making a case for the continued need for continued work, I think we've missed an opportunity.
Yeah, and to me, this is not like the end all. That's not, to me, and I'm also talking, speaking with Joan, just regarding the community too, and questions. So this is not like, okay, we're getting our presentation, then we're done. Like, that's not what's in my head.
Right, but it has
that-
been mentioned at the board level, that once you share this, then your work here is done. That has literally been said at the meeting. So
But even if they did that, if you look at the verbiage, how the charter and everything else, that didn't say any of that.
I would
Right,
agree.
so it didn't say once you get they didn't even know we were gonna do an audit tool.
Right.
Right, so yes, you're right. So I think it's more about me as well when I'm writing my stuff and I'll share it with the group is just naming that stuff.
Right.
Actually saying it so they understand.
Thank you.
Their value in the very front end of the presentation, revisiting the charge or the charter, because I think the equity audit addressed a number of those pieces, and then Joel, the other aspects that you wanted to provide updates, just to refresh people.
Yes.
It was their charter, or their charge.
So I started working on that already. So looking at the charge, Mike did a great job with the charge in terms of like just the things that we're focusing on as a committee, right? The things we should be looking at. I think the only thing that I tweaked, because I thought that it aligned with everything that we should be doing as a committee. I also was just researching other DEI committees in general and what they do. It's more extensive than this, definitely. So, but I also feel like this is a document that can continue to be moving forward. It's not one of those things, okay, you do 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's it, you know, because what happened and, you know, something happens and we gotta do 5, 6. So the only thing that I said, so in chart 7, I put report to the Board of Education a summary of the current working progress of the committee on a quarterly basis or as needed. I feel it's important that we have a good working relationship with the board. I think we should be having regular conversations, and that's why even talking with Joan, I think is a good thing, just so she understands what's going on direction wise. But I feel like communication is really important. So the only thing I added was like, yes, we should give like a quarterly, this is what we're doing. So at least they have an idea rather than just a recommendation, right? We're given a recommendation, but we should get some sort of progress. But then if something's needed prior to that, we should also have that open dialogue as well. The other thing I did add, and if you want to add to the chart, does everyone have access to that or see what the charge is? Beck, is there any way that you can put that up on
Is that?
the one you
in the
sent me?
folder?
Yeah, it's in that folder. Well, no, did you? Yeah, I think maybe you did put it in there. I also came up with a mission statement because I feel like it's important that we have a mission statement. If you want me to read it, I'll read it to
Well,
you
what did
guys.
we write?
Well, we
Like
had
last
Never
fall.
Finished it, it looked like. I went back.
I
and
went
looked at
back to
that
look at
too.
small and it didn't
It wasn't
have
quite
a final
done.
version. So I mean, we wrote this together, but it does have comments and stuff that makes it look unfinished. So.
Yeah. And then what I'll read this too, so just we can add it or see and some of the stuff that I see here. Could you go to the charge?
This. There's know where this is.
It's our very first
It's
meeting.
our very
Monique
first
has it
meeting.
here.
I feel like those meeting materials might not have gotten in this drive.
No,
I feel like it was in the board book,
Yeah, that's.
possibly an early email.
But how about that 9, let's duck into that 9/29/20 folder and let's just double check. What's that?
Mission.
I don't,
that PDF. I don't-
Rebecca, I'm gonna email it to you.
can you put it in the drive by chance?
And I think, you know, one thing, and Joel's put, you know, a lot of work into this draft, and we need to look at that. Gina, I think you did, I think if I understand you accurately, I think I agree with you that we should consider in the front of this report saying something to, this involves continued work and the committee looks forward to continuing to contribute to the district's work, and then there's something like that actually in the body of this. I think
Because
that
I'm
could
just
be good.
concerned that I mean, we're an ad hoc committee, which means temporary, like. And I don't know of any other committees that include non-school board members like this that are not ad hoc in nature.
I mean, what about?
So
the
they
medical
keep
committee?
referring to the 12.
No,
Yeah, I don't know that there's a timeline associated with them either. Good point. But it said 12 to 18 months and we're at 12. We're definitely, obviously not at 18. But I think one of the recommendations, I don't know what it looks like because I don't know of other committees that have existed in this way ever, but.
But even the 12 to 18, that was just giving us 4.
I agree. I just think that has been a talking point for why we should not need to continue.
Oh, I see.
And so I'd like for us to be prepared to have a proposal of what it might look like on a more extended basis. Tim, have you had any?
Well, I can
knowledge
think of it, I can think of committees, one called ad hoc or advisory. We've utilized those for human growth and development, which is required by state law. We've also, in my career, used them for input from the community on facilities planning. Those have all been short-term committees of a year, sometimes a bit more than a year. Now, a very long time ago, when I first joined the district, we had some advisory committees that were standing committees to advise certain areas of the district, but those fell out of favor in terms of our overall approach a little after the turn of the century.
I mean, if someone says they don't want a DEI committee, like, how does the school say that? I mean, if they do, I mean,
been set? So
I mean, I understand, maybe community members said it, maybe some people said it, but to dissolve our committee, I think that would be I mean, obviously a service, but it would be a big issue, you know? I'm just hoping it's not gonna go there.
So perhaps Tim, you would just be ready to speak to what has happened in the past, or do you feel it would be prudent for us to include as part of our recommendation that our work here is just beginning?
Well, I think if it's a sense of the committee, which I believe it is, that the work needs to continue. And, you know, I think the board that, you know, Joel's talking about making sure we have a closer partnership in the work of the committee, the work of the board. I think that's important. The board's going to be very involved with facilities planning for, you know, the next year. There's a lot of important areas in here that I think, you know, based on the work that's done in this report, really call out for additional follow-up. And so I guess I would say, if the thinking around the table is that we feel this committee has an important role to play in continuing to be part of the district's work in this area, probably put that in the report.
I would also suggest that, I mean, this is a committee that has community members and students. And I feel like it's been really important to me to hear what students are thinking about the subject and what community members are thinking. So I feel like that is a really important function that I would not want to lose, because I don't know how would we hear from representatives from students, you know, from the students, if this group is not here.
See, I guess my mindset was totally different. I didn't think this was like an end all, we're saying goodbye. Like, I guess I never thought that. And the only thing I worry about is when we start talking about, well, like we're trying to justify our committee, that it makes it seem like we know it's gonna end and that's it, even though the verbiage did not say that it's gonna end.
I'm just saying, I watch every school board meeting, and it's been talked about multiple times as your work here is wrapping up. Thank you.
And then what is the board say?
I mean, that has been a board statement.
Oh, the board, someone from the board
Yes.
is saying that?
Yes.
Oh.
There
So
there have been different opinions around the table. I think.
I don't think it's a unanimous opinion,
But
but I
it's being
just
said.
think it has been voiced, and so I would like to be prepared to speak to that concern, because
And Mike has his hand up. And
Yeah, I really appreciate what was added there. I mean, I think the one question to also be prepared to answer is that I will anticipate is what's the need to continue the DEI committee when you have other committees that appear to have some overlap for that. So that's specifically referring to the policy committee that Ted Fry is the chair of, and the goals committee, which I have no idea who's the chair of it at this point. And I can say that having been the chair of both of those committees in the past, policy has not met since, I believe, February 2020, which is amazing given that we had a lot of policy changes in the last year. We had no meetings. And the goals committee for my first 2 years on the board met, I believe, once. So those committees just aren't really doing anything and never really have done anything, at least unless there's someone who actually takes an interest in doing it. So I think, Joel, you kind of got to that point, is that this committee is about doing the work that the board may just not have the interest in doing, and giving them some options, which they can take or leave. But actually putting things together, I mean, this committee has met more than any other committee, probably by far, other than the facilities committee during referendum planning. So I'm not saying we need to justify the existence, but to say, we're answering questions and bringing up issues that other committees never have and haven't shown a predilection towards actually getting towards. And it's the right place to get moving. I worry sometimes that referring things to committees can be a way to ensure things go there to die and not make progress on it. But I don't think that's what this committee is about. And if we want to make progress, this is the right place for it. So I don't want to keep talking about how we justify the committee other than to just anticipate some of those questions. And I think talking about how it's taking the place of some of the stuff that policy or goals would otherwise have to do is important.
Right, but the thing is the policy or goals, isn't there like 2 people on it? So it's 3 making decisions. In terms of, like, you talk DEI, 3 people can make decisions for DEI, right? So that's the whole point of having a group of individuals doing that. And then a various, multiple people on that committee making those decisions.
Right, and the board committees are for the most part very administrative driven. I mean, curriculum in particular, when I was on that, it's very much, this is what's going on with curriculum, and the curriculum committee says, okay, at least that's what I said, because I knew nothing about curriculum. But in terms of other things, policy always struck me as the most interesting, and that's why I wanted to do it, because that's actually the district's rules. But if we're not actually talking about things, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So there are parts that can be board driven, but I haven't seen a lot of that in the last 3 or 4 years. This is committee driven because it's a committee of people who want to actually be there, and can get things to the board. It just really requires someone on the actual board to ensure that it's being heard there. And I know we have that. Does that kind of answer your question, Joel?
Yes, it does. Thanks, Mike.
So I don't know, I kind of look at this with a different perspective. I hear what people are saying, but I also feel as if, I don't understand why we are looking to justify the committee when we go to the school board. I mean, we're not taking a stand on anything. We've done an equity audit to look at a lot of different areas, and we're bringing them good information for things where we can move forward. We're not making any proposals. We're not making any big recommendations. We're giving facts as we know them. And I kind of feel like we're on the defensive instead of being of like, here's what we found. And we're just making observations, and it's up to the board, the committee, whomever, to show how we can move forward to support what our school district is doing really well already. And how can we add on to that with the things that we have found? I mean, when I look at everything we've been discussing for the past year, I mean, there's not a lot of things that are controversial. I mean, this is just looking at a lot of different aspects, and we're just going to give them a thumbnail at this presentation. We obviously aren't going to do a deep dive and go through this whole thing, but this is in general what we're finding, and these are areas where we can move forward with. I don't see it as offense or defense. I see it as we're bringing some new ideas and some new perspectives.
Now, the one thing I do have to say though is we might not be controversial now. I'm not saying that's our role to be controversial, but that doesn't necessarily mean that at some point there might be something that comes up that is controversial. And again, like you said, we're just talking about. I don't think we're taking aside that we're not doing this. And again, we're looking. The lens is for every student, right? We're not just looking at a subgroup. But I also want to make sure that we're separate from the board too, right? Like we're like just kind of like the medical committee, committee, the decisions that they make. They're just making recommendations. And then they can either take the recommendations or leave the recommendations, but it's still recommendations. But sometimes it might be hard for people to hear some of the things that we're going to say. you know,
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
So when we started this work, I think the biggest takeaway that I got was our only purpose as a group was to make recommendations. So as we rewrite this charge, I think that's what you're doing. Like what you're saying is maybe here's the work we have, and we'd love to see how to work as a team to bring aspects of this forward. So are we going to continue to be on a recommendation charge, or are we going to continue to move where we could think about really enacting some of these things? Where are our options?
I think, you know, and again, Mike is the one who got everything started, right? So my vision is, what I'm assuming is we've already did the groundwork right now, right? We did the work, we see what we're capable of doing, and we're gonna continue to move forward. Now, I think the dialogue, obviously, with administration and the board is really important, because that's where it comes, where we can actually have some teeth in things, rather than just making recommendations all the time. Maybe they will say, okay, if it's this, you guys, you know, if you say this, we'll go with it. But they still gotta vote for it. They gotta vote on it anyway. But I feel like as we keep developing, and this is just a living thing, that we will get to a point, hopefully, where we'll be able to have more teeth, I guess, in terms of, because again, right now, we're just recommending, the board does not have to go with anything that we say. You know, regardless of how much time that was spent on it. But it would be nice to get to a place where this is just kind of like a standing thing, and again, you know, what we say is valued and, you know, respected, and we're able to do so. So that's, for me, I'm thinking, yes, I want to move towards not just making recommendations, but actually doing more than just that, if we're able to, and it's in the scope of what we're allowed to.
Okay, thank you.
So as I'm listening to this, it sounds like in terms of a general presentation, there's maybe 4 or 5 points. One is to recollect why we came to be in the first place. The second is to introduce the process and findings of our equity audit. And the equity audit was the first step in looking at what is, which is what needs to be done if one is going to address any of those, that list of things on, which are, you know, pretty intensive on the charge. And we're providing the summary within our 12 to 18 months as we were asked. Then in doing this work, we have these recommendations, and as well, there were some immediate items that we provided some recommendations on that needed immediate action. And then what could be in terms of continued delivery on the original charge, or if it's a modified charge, of what this entity could do for the board. How can we serve the board in the future so that we can meet these goals? And if that seems like it can anticipate a lot of the different things about people asking why or all the what ifs. It's just a sort of factual of this is what happened. And I agree, we can't control the questions that they may ask, but certainly we can be responsive and see where it takes. So I think it's sort of, I'm just trying to simplify it in my mind of what really you need to be prepared to do.
Well, this is why I think it's important, as many people that can show up that day, show up. Because the thing is that we need to try to, it's no different than the public, right? The public cares about this. And the thing is that if we have the public in here supporting what we're doing, that's going to speak volume anyway, right? So I'm just putting it out there that if you could show up just to be a support, even if it's for a little bit, to show up so they realize that, yes, this is definitely important to us, right? This is all on a volunteer basis. We're meeting through the summer, we're doing stuff, people are spending their time editing, researching, all that stuff. And to me, like, if that doesn't mean that we're saying we're in this for the long haul, or else we wouldn't be doing this, you know, so.
So thanks for that recap. I think I feel ready to try to take the list of recommendations and what we just highlighted about the presentation and turn it into some slides. I do have a question about what that, I mean, do I create that, share a draft by a certain time with the committee for feedback, or how do we prefer to?
I think the problem is if we keep doing too much feedback and showing,
Yeah.
it's gonna slow the process down. Right now, to me, this is the finalization, right? At this point, if you come up with something, and obviously you probably want to show it to somebody, so they see it. right?
Diane articulated it
Yes.
beautifully, yeah.
So definitely, that's what I'm saying, but I feel like if you open it up to the committee for feedback, because right now, everyone didn't do feedback on that anyway.
Right.
So why even bother going through that
I
process?
agree. There have been so many people that have been such a big part of this who haven't been here lately. And so I'm saying that I'm willing to put a draft together and share it out. If no one gives feedback, that's fine. I don't really have a fear of too many cooks in the kitchen because I'll have a draft and then just be open to feedback.
I mean, the only issue is if there's changes, then that's when it needs to come back to the committee, right? So just say you're starting to get this feedback and then you start adding that feedback. Now the document's changed, right? So I think the thing is, we want to be careful of that as well. And I understand people haven't been here, but I feel like there's enough representation, because I mean, I think there's enough representation of those people. I don't know.
Do you want to have a couple people work with you so that it's vetted out through a couple lenses versus just one?
I mean, I guess if people don't care, I'm also willing to figure this out, not on everyone's time.
So what I would suggest is, Gina, it sounds like you and Joel are the for sure two people that are going to be presenting. Board book, we're a week and a half before we release board book.
I would need it no later than the Wednesday before, which would be the 8th. And before I would leave work that day, so
Yep.
I leave at 4 o'clock.
So I-
So it can get on to.
So that's.
I'm
fine.
confident, in the work you would do, especially if you were, I mean, I have no reservation about you sharing it with all of us, but I mean, if you're the two presenting and you're working from this discussions around the table, I'm totally confident that you two are gonna pull together an excellent presentation. So I don't feel like it needs to come back here. I mean, if you want to open it up for feedback, great, but
Okay.
I know the quality of work will.
And then Gina, I'm not trying to say if you want that help, that's
Sure.
fine. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Got it.
My thing is more about process.
Yeah.
And just kind of like, I think everything is great. I think we've decided, let's just move forward and just do it.
Just to close the loop on the actual paper document, did we want to include a final conclusion paragraph? Or do we want to just leave it as it ends right now, which would be before the table? We'll delete that last table. And it would just end after the 7th, as we go through all 7. So it would end right before it says for references where it would end. Or did we want to have a conclusion paragraph? And if we did, I could throw one together, and if Laura is still willing to work with me, she could maybe look at it and then we can proof it one more time, and then we're done with that.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
And I'm willing to come to the meeting and stand with you all. I think that it's time to take a next step, and I would like to do that.
And I think it's really just getting the word out.
Rebecca, I was able to find one mission statement that I had sent out to the whole high school staff, but then when I went to go find it in our folder, I wasn't able to find it, but I do think it might be helpful to have that mission statement, because it just.
So that, this one?
Gosh, I can't see that far.
There's draft language underneath it. I don't feel like
Yes.
that's the final.
I don't think that's the final one. The
So-
one that I have sent out here to the high school is much more polished. But all I'm saying is I think that it would be really helpful to have that at the beginning of the presentation, just for me to look through this. I'm looking at all the things that we have done. And it's good. It's good stuff.
So let me just read this quick and just let me know. This is what I wanted to add to the mission statement.
Mission statement?
Yeah, to the mission statement. So part of what you guys wrote, I kept for like 2-3 lines. I thought it was good word. So the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion DEI Ad Hoc Committee was formulated to initiate dialogue around and to make recommendations for work around diverse, equitable, and inclusive policies and practices within the Waunakee School District. The DEI Ad Hoc Committee strives to serve the students, staff, and community members within the Waunakee School District. We also strive to work towards an environment within the Waunakee School District where all students and staff are valued, supported, and empowered, regardless of their individual background or beliefs. As an ad hoc committee, we encourage and support an inclusive culture within the Waunakee School District, and we challenge opinions and assumptions in order to create equity for everyone. So I was just saying to add some stuff. I'm not saying that we necessarily have to put that whole thing in since we have something, but I feel like there's some verbiage that we should probably have in our mission statement. I know last time we were talking about a vision statement. I mean, a vision, which is separate than the mission. I feel like as we continue to move on, that we can do more of a vision statement. But like I said, I just came up with that, and I was just like, I don't know if this is something we can just kind of add. What I could do anyway is if we're all in agreement with the mission statement we already have, and when we did agree, I could add to that, and then if that's okay, then that's what we should probably put in the paragraph beforehand.
And I like the
Feedback?
language, I like the language that you have there, Joel. I think it captures, you know, what we've talked about around the table, and I think the focus on inclusivity is good.
I think the biggest thing I'm thinking at is that, because then you have the naysayers and they pull things apart. But my thing is that we're talking about everybody. We want to make sure that everybody things are equitable. So people can't, how do you fight when we're saying, yeah, we want your kid too to be everything equitable? It's not just the kids of color or disability or, you know, gender related. So, you know, I feel like that's really important that we say those things, just because it kind of diminishes a lot of that negative feedback, because you can't argue with that stuff when we're saying, yes, we want our students in Waunakee. We're not talking about the nation. We're not talking about Madison. We're talking about Waunakee. So,
I think the language was great. I wonder though, if it's a change to the mission, if that should be a part of an upcoming I don't know. It wasn't part of the agenda for today, so I would just be careful about. I think it's fine to say that that is the opening paragraph to the discussion, but if we're reconsidering the mission that we voted on, I would suggest that we do that as part of an agenda. That's just my initial thoughts about it, but I love it, so I would vote for it right now.
and that does make sense. If we are going to change, because we did vote on mission statement, well, I don't want to do something that, and again, I think what's just throwing me off, kind of what Monique said, I didn't think this was like a final discussion, like we're trying to prove our worth to the board. But I also understand, you know, what's going on in the community and what people are saying.
Yeah.
And we have to be prepared. You can't just assume that, you know, everything's going to be good.
Yeah.
And I know there's a lot of things we have to say or put out there. So I don't want to be naive in that. And I agree with that. Does everybody else kind of agree with that we should not touch the mission statement?
I think it adds to it that we collectively did the first mission statement, and that it would be really nice to see it evolve as we revisit the work toward the next step to do it together.
Okay,
Likely probably ending up with many of the same things, but then. from
but it's
multiple
collective.
minds.
and we're doing it together.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, that's fine.
But Joel, including that paragraph, I think.
Right.
is-
It can be a paragraph without being the mission statement.
Exactly.
Oh, so you're saying still add it, just don't make it part of the mission.
That would be my
I
And
mean, I
then
think
come
okay.
back at a later
summary of who
meeting.
we are.
and
Okay, that
put the
makes, that
imprimatur.
totally
Yeah.
makes sense. Okay.
Because I do really like some of that
Yeah.
language.
Okay, okay,
So we're just not formally changing the mission right
Gotcha.
now, but yes, we will use that language in the presentation.
okay.
It could be even in those last slides. After doing all of this work, you know, if we were to look at it, if we were to
Yes.
discuss a collective mission moving forward, these are some of the aspects that we might add in.
But this is what I could just talk about anyway, so like, I have
Right.
my piece, we don't even need to put that in the last, I mean, we can. But what I'm saying is, this is just something I can incorporate.
Love it.
Perfect. All right, next thing. Okay, is there any more discussion on the audit tool? We're all good in terms of what we're gonna be doing. But we have to get Rebecca the stuff. All right, so we already spoke, Tim and I have nothing to report about the reporting tool. Shared language glossary of terms, any update on that?
So we are meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
Work on that.
Okay. And is that something we are gonna add into the report?
I think, I'm not sure if we had the intention of adding it into the report yet, just yet. I think maybe the talk was to have it before we may go into a community meeting at
Oh.
some point in time. But somebody can correct us if we're wrong, because we.
No, that sounds right to me, and so I think, you know, the community meeting hasn't been scheduled.
I think it has.
It has been, actually, now that I think about it,
Yes.
but
Is that-
there's
End of
time,
September.
20, I don't have the exact date.
I
mean,
just like the last Monday, right?
Yes.
27th.
Yeah,
27th.
it's the 27th, so it's 2 weeks after the board meeting. It's the last Monday in September. So that's about 5 weeks away, I guess. So that would give us time to schedule a meeting, to go over that around the table, and then,
All right. So do you want to, and I didn't know how you guys are gonna do it, are you just going to like start it and then just kind of put it on shared drive so we can see it as well? Or is it something we could just kind of build up and then present it? How do you do that?
Yeah, we haven't discussed that. So if someone has some direction for how that, you know, how that might best be presented, that would be great.
So if it was me, I would suggest probably when you start it, probably have it open so people can add to it. Because again, I think, and then obviously you guys will be the final, you know, the final in terms of goals, and then we have the conversation or discussion, but there really isn't much discussion, because obviously it's terminology,
Yeah.
you know, so, and we're just talking about general stuff anyway.
Yeah.
That's common, that people should know. So I guess I would say just come up with it and post it.
And I think there have been a couple different audiences that have been talked about, like, we had talked about the audience being kind of community, so that we're being transparent with the community and they know what we're talking about when we're talking about this stuff. And then we had also talked about another audience being like staff and students. So I think that we're gonna start by making sure that we have what for that community meeting, and then progress toward the audiences like staff and students.
So could you just give me an example of what the difference would be, what you would say for the community, versus you would say for the staff and students?
So, like, there have been these buzzwords that have been going around in the community that I think there are some misunderstandings. Like last week, Dave talked about how there are some people who say, like, when we're talking about equity, we're automatically talking about CRT, which is not what we're doing. So, I think addressing those things that might be misunderstandings, or might just be things like, oh, I didn't know that was something you're talking about, or I didn't know that's what that meant. But then Leslie had talked about, for some staff members, you know, maybe understanding why we might use certain terminology, like why we might say people of color and maybe not like colored people.
Oh, okay. I got
Those
you.
kinds of things that as we staff members are working with students, we
Okay.
have a better understanding of some of the terms that we're using to make sure that we're being respectful.
And that
I
makes
think
sense.
that's,
That makes sense.
yeah. So, and I think part of that's just because some of us on the subcommittee had different ideas of like what we were gonna be doing. But I think those are both really important
Okay.
things
Yeah,
to
no,
make sure
that-
everyone.
now I understand. I mean, because I didn't know when you were saying different words, I'm thinking, wouldn't that be the same? But you're right, when it's internal and you're having conversations with that, or staff is using terminology, you know, but that's also with policy, right? Making sure that, you know, administration, you know, you're having those conversations, you're talking about that stuff.
Right.
So,
I do have one question. I know we're at a time. So in moving forward in terms of being offensive versus defensive, I'm wondering if we do or do not go in, do we stay in the area of vocabulary that talks about what we do and we believe as a district as opposed to what we are not? So meaning equity, diversity, and inclusion are the things that we work towards to ensure all students' needs are met in a whatever, a suitable environment. If we start defining CRT, we're starting to bring in those politics pieces that, you know, definitely bring in that controversy. But are we really wanting to step into that, or do we just kind of want to define what and where we are going for our students?
I think,
I don't know.
I think right now,
Yeah.
I think it's better just to stay on that surface level, right? Because you're right, the minute we start taking, or just say you define CRT,
Yeah.
you know, people are already going to assume, they might not listen to anything else,
You
all
just hear the
CRT, and it just over a word, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is a good idea, maybe just to kind of focus on the things that we're trying to do for our students right now. And then obviously as time goes on and, you know, as more things happen, you know, and we have to bring stuff up, then that, to me, that's when we add it to the list, and that's when we start having those conversations. So yes, I mean, does anyone else have any thoughts on that? About our verbs and terms and stuff, should we just keep it kind of like basic?
Yeah, I mean, I think sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, I think that over a long enough period of time, people will show you who they are, and just by being honest and accurate and truthful about what we're doing, the majority of people that listen to that will understand, and that's the right thing to do. And if anyone's coming up now and saying something alternative to that, just by being honest and straightforward, I think it's the best thing to do. So I think you're right on, Joel.
I was just gonna add that last time we talked for a while about this, and we said that we are defining things as we're using them. And so sticking to the scope of conversations we've been having and we're trying to do makes sense to me.
So obviously diversity, equity, inclusion,
Perfect.
that's in our.
And that's in our
We gotta
three
define
keywords.
it.
Love it.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So we're all good with that?
Mhm.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so, so updates on board actions and decisions, that would be informational to the committee. Dave's not here, so we can't really speak to that.
I don't think they've met since we have, so.
Oh, no, they haven't, you're right. I don't think there's
No, that's
anything
right.
that's been going on, right? Okay. The next thing is discussion of the district response about national and local incidents. Right now, I don't really think there's any, well, there is actually in Afghanistan. There's a lot of stuff going on, but I don't necessarily think we have the time right now to talk about that stuff. Pretty heavy. Does anybody have anything to add to that, or they want to mention it? I mean, I think honestly, I think those things are important, because I think, you know, it's important that we talk about things that are going on outside this country, because I think it impacts just the things we do. So, I mean, I don't want people to feel like they can't talk about those things, because it's like, oh, no, this is a DEI committee, but if you think about it, it's the DEI committee, we should probably, if it impacts us and students, think about it. Wait till students come in and they have questions and they see this, and you know, they're asking teachers, and, you know, so I think it is important.
And their parents are deployed.
Yeah.
It brings a wider lens to our work, I think, than any assumptions for what, you know, sort of equity stands for in terms of like of race and equity. There are more ways of looking at equity that fall
Race,
within and
yeah.
outside of our day-to-day world. And I don't know that we can cover that all in one conversation, but just making that and being mindful of that as we are making decisions about what we bring up to kids and to public, so that we have multiple perspectives.
You know, I think about women's rights, right? You know, you're talking human rights. So I mean, it's just
Yeah.
all these things that should impact us.
Mhm.
All right, so future meetings, it's the same stuff, we just didn't get to talk about it, but basically the discussion and recommendations to the district to further equity for other issues, including building accessibility, audits of accessibility for websites, discussion of district progress on the removal of Native American imagery, which we already spoke about that. B is discussion of district hiring practice, ensuring a diverse workforce. The other thing with that was, having the head of HR come in, having conversations, just kind of knowing more about the process and what that may look like. And then C is discussion of district curriculum on the teaching of issues involving race and ethnicity in the United States. So that's broad, but I mean, obviously that's with curriculum and stuff, so it's not specifically just that. One thing I do have to say, and I mean, I'm not gonna give names or anything, but I had a situation where somebody's disability came into play, and it's more about conversations with kids. I'm assuming this is more for the staff. Like, I don't know too many details, but disability is really important. I think we need to focus on that. And sometimes kids don't know how to interact, or they forget, and they're not realizing they're forgetting about those things. And I think that's an area that we need to touch on too. So again, there's more things, but this is just one of those things that just happened and it started making me think, and I was like, oh yeah, right, this would be a good way to have those conversations with kids and to explain to them, you got to be thoughtful, you got to think about this. And so just to put that out there. Anything else before I adjourn?
In terms of future meetings, can I just ask for that community meeting that's in September? Is that something where our group is supposed to prepare for it, or is that something that the administration is facilitating?
So it's a linkage session of the board. I don't think it's
Okay.
completely, I mean, I think it'd be good for the committee to be present. Because the purpose of the linkage session is to provide information to the community about the district's work in this area, and this committee is an important part of that. To what extent, who's providing the information before it opens up? I don't think we've decided that yet. It's a month away though,
Good,
so
good
that'll be
enough.
soon.
I just wanted to know if there was anything we needed to do.
I don't think so. I think just being there, obviously it's open forum, right? So it's not like we can't answer something if we know the answer to it, obviously. But I didn't think we have to prepare for anything. I mean, as a committee.
I think it would be good to clarify though, because I think the word committee was specifically mentioned in the discussion about this meeting. So,
When you meet with Joan, it might be a good topic,
Okay.
just
I'll
to
bring it up.
explore with her, and I'll check in with Randy.
Okay, sounds good. All right, if there's no further agenda items, let's adjourn. That
Can I
motion?
just ask one question before you adjourn? Are you going to schedule future meetings?
Yes. Yes.
So do you want that to start circulating now?
Yes, actually, why don't you get that going? Because obviously, yeah, let's just start doing that so we stay on our schedule.
Do you want me to just put a poll on?
What if you want to pull out? Thank you for.
Thank you.
this is September.
I was gonna say, we're looking at September then?
Yeah, I would say,
Yes.
September.
Are we looking at before the community meeting so that one of the items is the language?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That'd be
Just
perfect.
wanted to
Yeah, that's perfect.
make
So
sure I
in
had
the
it.
first 3 weeks of September.
Yeah.
Who's doing
Well,
that?
then you should, I guess my question
Doing
now,
it.
I don't want to cause like stress, because obviously it's stressful. So do we push it?
That's not
I think it's
stressful.
important.
It's not?
No, no.
Okay,
I
just
think-
making sure. I'm
We're
not
on a
trying to
roll. We
create.
just gotta get a date on the calendar.
Okay,
We're good.
Sooner rather than later.
Okay.
It's stressful when it's like, no, I can't come.
Okay.
because-
What's the date of the community meeting?
Monday, the 27th.
the 27th. All right, can I have a motion to adjourn? Okay, second.
Seconded.
Oh, that was bad.
Like Jeff. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? All right, meetings has ended.